Well, this is Dave Gaddis, and it's December 5th, and today we're interviewing Roberta Burroughs in her offices here in Houston. So I want to welcome you, and thank you for joining with us. Why don't we start at the beginning and tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in Houston, Texas in 1949.
Okay, and did you grow up your entire childhood in Houston? Or?
My entire childhood was spent here.
And what did your parents do?
My mom was mostly homemaker, and my dad was a postal service employee.
Okay, and was there a particular neighborhood in Houston that you lived in?
Well, until I was 14 years old, we lived in the 3rd Ward, and then we moved to Sunnyside.
Okay, and you graduated from high school in Houston?
I graduated from Worthing High School in Sunnyside in Houston.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Hampton Institute in Virginia, which they have renamed Hampton University.
Okay, and what made you choose that?
They came to my high school with a beautiful sideshow, and it depicted this campus, which is lovely. It's in the Tidewater region. It's on the water, and I could picture myself sitting out on the water studying, and I never once did that, however. And then on top of that, a couple of my teachers had gone to Hampton, and they were just the epitome of what I wanted to become.
Okay.
And so
and what did you
influenced
study
me.
at Hampton?
I was a sociology major with a minor in political
Okay.
science.
And what made you choose that?
I thought I wanted to be a social worker.
Okay.
I did change my mind, apparently.
So did you go straight to graduate school?
Yes, I did. I went
did you
to I went to Cornell, and I majored in urban planning there.
And what made you choose urban planning?
Probably like many of my generation, I stumbled into it. I had this interest in political science, in sociology, in anthropology, in journalism, in English, in history, and I was like, okay, what can I do to bring all these things together? I actually mailed letters around to different schools seeking guidance, and finally my roommate, who was also a sociology major, came home one day and she said, why don't you consider urban planning? I'm applying to MIT for urban planning, and maybe you could apply for urban planning as well. I thought, sounds intriguing. And I didn't want to go to MIT. I felt it was time for she and I to part and me to make some new friends. So I applied to Cornell. I also applied to Princeton at the Woodrow Wilson School of International Affairs. But I didn't really have a strong language background, and they were really looking for that. So I did not get into Princeton. I got into Cornell, and the rest is history.
Okay. You remember any of the faculty members that stood out?
Oh, absolutely.
Guided you?
Darrell Williams and Carrie Hershey were new young faculty members who were focused on social policy, the social policy aspects of urban planning. And I took a lot of classes from them. John Reps was there at the time, a preeminent zoning expert. Pierre Clavel was there at the time. Those are the names I can remember.
Okay. And how did a girl from big city of Houston fit in Ithaca, New York?
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
Funny you should ask. It was really, really an adjustment for me. It was very cold. It was very small. The food was different. I learned to eat pastrami. Oh yeah, pastrami was not something that we ate in Houston at the time. And so it was a bit of culture shock. But I became a part of a very close-knit group of people in the planning program. In fact, my second semester, 4 of us moved off campus into a big house, and 3 of us were in the planning program.
Okay. Do you keep in touch with those folks?
On and off. Kathy Ross, you may have heard of her. She's at Georgia Tech. She was one of my roommates, and she was in the program. And so she and I keep in touch on and off. The other person who was in the planning program never worked in the field a day in her life. She went to Oneonta, somewhere like that, the day after we graduated, and applied for IBM, and she's been with IBM ever since.
So you're a newly minted graduate with your master's in planning?
Yeah.
What happened? Where did you go to work? Where did you go to work?
Well, I tell you that between my first and second years in graduate school, I applied to the internship at the planning department here in Houston, and I was accepted. So that was one of the places that I looked into when I got my degree, and they hired me to reinstitute the neighborhood planning division.
Okay. So what kinds of things did you do in the neighborhood planning section?
Oh, wow, that was fun. We did
And what
windshield
year was this?
surveys.
Do you remember what?
This would have been 73.
Okay.
And we conducted windshield surveys of housing and land use in all of the low moderate income neighborhoods, which is a lot for a city this size. And we had to drive around, teams of 3 people. We drove around those neighborhoods in the heat of the summer in Houston. Sweat gland erupted in my face. No doctor could figure out what was wrong with me, just tiny little bumps. And finally I went to a dermatologist and he said, "What kind of work do you do?" And I said, "Well, we're doing these windshield surveys on an air-conditioned Dodge Coronet." And I guess that's what happened to me. So it was really, it was a fun job. We discovered all the really cool restaurants in those neighborhoods, and we go back to them now. And we were a very close-knit group of people, and we still keep in touch on a regular
Who were some of
basis.
those people?
Mike Davis, who is in San Francisco, works for ICF International. Tracy Smith, I've kind of lost track of Tracy. Last thing I knew of her, she was working in Newport News, Virginia. Then we had Don Ellerman, who's not with us anymore. Paulette Wagner, who became a close personal friend and who is president of her civic club. She's now retired. She and I see each other a lot, and we talk about, in fact, I'm doing a project in her neighborhood right now, so she's toured me around. So it was just a really good group of people back then.
And I'm presuming the windshield surveys back then, you used paper maps and colored pencils?
We used paper maps. I forget Reeves Gilmore. He was our prime mapping person and map colorer, and he has retired from Harris County and is now living in Maine.
But that was before computer mapping?
That was before computer mapping. It was pretty rough. Pretty primitive is the word I'm after, I think. But hey, I just wonder what will replace what we're doing now, 26 years, 40 years from now. I'm sure something will.
So how big was the planning department in Houston at that time?
You know,
Was it a big department or small? Or?
It was small by the standards of large cities.
Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't very big.
Because some people wonder about planning in Houston
Yeah.
and zoning.
Yeah, we have a bad reputation. It's a bad rap too, though. We don't deserve it.
Right. Yeah, you all have done a lot of good planning.
We've done a lot. There's a lot of planning that goes. When people say that we don't plan, I have to correct them. I've managed to make a living as a planning consultant, mainly working in this region. There's a lot of planning that goes on.
Okay, so you started off in doing neighborhood planning.
Yeah.
Where did you progress from there?
Well, from there, I became the assistant chief of the comprehensive planning division. Unknown to most, even people who are in the planning department now, we worked on a comprehensive plan as an intern between 72 and 73. We, under the direction of Roscoe Jones, we were putting together a comprehensive plan, and my responsibility was community facilities.
Okay.
So I became assistant director of the comprehensive planning division. Ultimately, I became assistant director for redevelopment. That's the position I was in when I retired. Well, I call it retired when I resigned after 15 years. It sounds better to say that I retired from there. They had a retirement party for me and everything. It was pretty cool.
And what were some of the projects that you did that you were particularly proud of?
Well, as assistant director for redevelopment, I was responsible for housing, neighborhood planning. I oversaw some, what are they called? The Houston Housing Finance Development Corporation. I was also responsible for neighborhood economic development. I'm particularly proud of the fact that we instituted a small business lending program during the time that I was there. I also was responsible for the Community Development Block Grant Program for 5 years. And when I assumed that responsibility, the program was, to be kind, in disarray, and that's being kind. HUD was constantly on us about not meeting deadlines, not spending the money in a timely manner, and I turned that around, to tell the truth. So I'm very proud of that.
Okay. Anything else while you were at Houston that you want to talk about?
Well, let's see. Apart from the fact that a job in city government is a really good place for a planner to be at the entry level, I can't think of anything else, but I will say that it was a really good place to be. You just get so many tools when you're in city government, and you learn so many things, and you meet so many people, so many smart people, not only in the planning department, but in other departments. So I wouldn't trade anything for that governmental experience.
Okay. And at some point in time, you got involved in APA or its predecessor, AIP. When and how did you get involved?
Well, as a planner, I felt that I should be involved with my professional organization. It just seemed like the right thing to do. So when I discovered that, well, actually in graduate school, I discovered AIP and ASPO.
Okay.
And went to the conferences. My very first one was, I believe, an ASPO conference in Chicago. And really liked being around like-minded people, and I liked the fact that you learned a lot of things, all the best practices that came together at a conference, and so I decided I would continue that involvement once I became a professional practicing planner.
Okay.
So,
And did you get involved in section activities, or?
yeah, I was very involved in section activities at some point. My peers saw fit to elect me to be the section director, which was a very, very exciting time. I got to meet new people again from throughout the profession. I put on a big conference that was attended by people throughout the state. It was a transportation conference. We brought in Bob Lanier, who at the time was on the Highway Commission. We had the conference at the Four Seasons Hotel, so we had a really big venue. It was a very exciting time. I really loved being the section director.
Okay. And being section director allowed you to sit on the board? Did you go?
It allowed me to sit on the board, meet some.
On the board?
Yeah, I was the membership committee chairperson on the board. I was able to bring in a more diverse group into the organization by virtue of the fact that I knew a lot of people, at the time I worked in city government. I also met some pretty cool people like Mary Lou Henry and Sarah Jane White, who I consider to be mentors. I met really good people like Ted Sawaleski, who succeeded me as the section director. Jeff Table and I worked together at the time. He subsequently became section director. So those were all just really cool people to
Do you remember who was chapter
mingle with.
At the time, or some of the other chapter leaders?
The chapter president, excuse me, chapter president was, I believe it, excuse it, the chapter president was Sarah Jane White. I'm sorry. Hay fever.
That's okay. Did you go on to do anything at the national level? Or did you get involved in divisions? Were you involved in, say, the planning of the black community? Or?
Yeah, I am a member even now of the Planning of the Black Community Division, and also I've previously been a member of the Private Practice Division. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
This room is kind of drafty.
Okay. You okay?
I'll try.
Okay. Do you remember when you took the AIP or AICP exam?
I do remember that, but I don't remember the year.
Okay.
There were only 2 of us who took the exam at that time.
Was this the AIP? Was it before AICP?
No, it was at that time it had become, I'm a charter member of AICP.
Yeah, okay. So it was a written exam?
It was. Are they doing that differently now?
No, they're still doing it.
Oh,
except
okay.
It's computer-based now.
Oh,
Well, we have talked to a few folks at AIP where it was actually an oral exam. So we've
oh,
been kind of talking about how that's
okay.
So you decided to retire or resign from the city. And so what did you do next?
And I hung out my shingle and became Roberta Burroughs and Associates President and CEO.
And so what kinds of projects have you been working on?
Mainly community planning, public engagement, and a lot of community impacts assessments for transportation projects.
Okay. So highway projects? Or
Mainly light rail. We've been involved with all 5 of the light rail corridors that are opening up in Houston.
Okay.
So
Most
that's
of your
been.
work been in Houston, or have you done work elsewhere around?
We've worked around the country with Hope 6.
Okay.
We were on the ground floor with the Hope 6 work.
And for those that may not be familiar with Hope 6, tell me a little bit.
Hope 6 at the time was a very innovative program that HUD instituted with the idea that public housing needed to be reinvented, that it needed to kind of actually revert back to what the original concept was, which was, it was a jumping off point. It wasn't something that you expected to maintain as your permanent housing. So Hope had brought together a team of very smart people to be on a national committee to figure out how to reinvent public housing. And Hope 6 was what came out of that. And I got involved initially here locally with the Allen Parkway Village housing development reinvention, which was highly controversial. And ultimately, from that, got recognized as someone who might bring something to the process. And so I got put on some national teams to go around the country and help housing authorities figure out how to create programs that would help people become more economically self-sufficient. And I did that in 8 cities across the country, from Seattle on the west to Philadelphia on the east. And I bought, my sociology training really came into play there. I bought case management ideas to play in the process, and I was able to design programs that made sense in concert with the physical aspects, because in every instance, HUD was also demolishing the old public housing and building new at the existing sites.
And what about some of the light rail projects that you've worked on?
Well, the light rail projects, mainly the work I've done has had to do with how is this rail line going to affect community cohesion? How is it going to impact communities? So we look at existing land uses, community facilities, and we figure out, well, if the rail line goes down this alignment, it's alternatives analysis, looking at different alternatives and looking at which alternative alignment will have the least impact on community cohesion. So we've done a lot of that, and again, my urban planning training as well as my sociology background has come in handy there.
So you grew up in the 3rd Ward, and you've done some projects in the 3rd Ward?
I did. What's become kind of an emblematic project in 3rd was the one that we're known
and
for.
And for people who may not be familiar with Houston, you want to describe
Okay,
the 3rd
sure.
Ward?
The 3rd Ward is a rather big, I think it's 8.5 square miles or so, neighborhood in southeast Houston. It is a historic neighborhood. At one time, way back in the 1800s, I believe it was, the city was divided into 6 wards. And even though that is not, they were political wards, and even though they're not used that way anymore, the nomenclature has kind of stuck, which is, as we planners know, that's something that happens. And so the 3rd Ward was one of those 6 original wards. It is a predominantly African American neighborhood that is transitioning, as are many neighborhoods in Houston, into a more diverse neighborhood in terms of ethnicity. a group of civic leaders, civic and religious leaders, came together and raised the money to have a plan for the neighborhood. They had been meeting at a church, and finally someone said, let's bring Roberta Burroughs in, which happens quite often, as it turns out. And so I went to a meeting and I listened, and I said to them, I think you need a plan. And they said, oh, well, how would that help us? And I explained, that a plan is kind of a blueprint for the future. And they went out and they raised the money, and I put together an interdisciplinary team, and we did a plan for that neighborhood. The plan has been featured at the Contemporary Arts Museum. We put copies in the library. They can't keep copies in stock. It's just really become, and even now, people call me and they want a copy of the plan. It's become a teaching tool at Texas Southern University in the planning program there. So it's just really, it took hold, and now I've been approached recently about updating it.
Okay.
So.
Parts of the original plan been implemented successfully? Or?
Yeah, one of the things that came out of that plan is a tax increment reinvestment zone.
Okay.
And that, excuse me, that TERS has generated quite a bit of revenue that's gone into quite a few projects in the neighborhood. One of the big projects that they're doing now is they're rejuvenating, I guess you could say, revitalizing the oldest park, one of the oldest parks. It's called Emancipation Park. And it has a similar history to the Third Ward Plan, where a group of visionaries, and they were freedmen, they came together and they raised money for a park. It's now a city park, but at that time, it was a privately funded park. And so the TERS is bringing that park back to life. And when you drive over there, it's very exciting to see what's happening there. It's really going to be a great thing. And they want the park to have a national profile. They see it as something that could be a tourist destination for people who are interested in African American history. So that's one of the cool things that happened.
Okay. And you mentioned Texas Southern. You want to talk about some of your involvement at TSU?
I have taught at Texas Southern. I taught there for 3.5 years. I taught social policy and housing and principles and practices of urban planning. I'm still involved as a member of the Council of Planning Advisors. And in that capacity was one of the people who helped to get the school accredited a few years back.
And you've been involved with some other university as an adjunct?
Well, I do a lot of fair amount of guest lecturing. I try to bring planning into a larger world. I think sometimes we planners kind of talk to each other more than is healthy. And so I always try to reach out. So I have lectured in the social work program at Texas Southern. I've lectured in the community development program at Prairie View A&M University. And whenever I have a project, I try to make it interdisciplinary. The Third Ward Plan, for example, I brought in an organizational development consultant to help with a lot of the structuring of the public outreach, because I just felt like that person had some tools that could be brought to bear on the process that I didn't necessarily have as a planner. So I do that a lot.
Okay. And at some point in time, you were honored as a fellow of AICP. You want to talk about being?
I was. I'm trying to remember what year that was. It was the year of the New Orleans Conference. So would that have been 4 years ago? Something like that.
Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you. That was a real highlight of my career. It made me feel as if someone was really paying attention to what I've been up to.
Well, you've done more than just APA stuff. Are there some other organizations that you've been involved with?
Well, I'm now involved with the Women's Transportation Seminar Houston chapter. And what brought me to that is all the transportation work that I've been doing on the metro lines. We also had a project that was an alternatives analysis for the airport. So I felt like it might be good to start to mix and mingle. As I said, I'd kind of try to reach out and be involved beyond the planning profession. So there are a lot of women in that organization and a few men who have some ideas that I can bring to bear on some of the things that I'm doing in the planning world. Okay. So that's been a pretty cool thing.
Okay. Any other organizations that you want to talk about? Or?
Well, I'm involved with a lot of civic kinds of things. I've been honored by a couple of Congress people for the work that I do in the community. I seem to be the go-to person for a lot of what happens in the African American community in particular. So I've done a fair amount of pro bono work helping people figure out how data can inform projects that they're involved with. Have done some pro bono mapping for people who were trying to figure out where geographically things need to happen. And so we just get involved a lot with the Friends of Emancipation Park. We did some pro bono facilitation work for that project. So we do quite a lot of that. We enjoy it quite a bit.
Well, you have a unique perspective on Houston, having been here most of your life.
Right.
How has Houston changed, and how has planning in Houston changed?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You know, I used to, when they would get me from the airport, when I was at Hampton, and then when I was at Cornell, and we would, just on the journey from the airport back in the 70s, which is when I think we first started to make this huge transformation, I would just be amazed at all the changes that had taken place. And now, I say I need a bus tour of my own city, because there are all these things that are going on that I find out about if I happen to have a project in that particular community. But if I don't, it's just something that's hidden away from me. But there have been, for one of the things that's happening, the neighborhood where I grew up, Third Ward, is undergoing a real transformation that is happening in a lot of the close-in neighborhoods because of the appeal of not commuting anymore. So we're getting a lot of townhome development, some of which is exemplary, some is not. Don't care much for the townhomes that have aluminum siding on them, but it is what it is. And then we're getting just the growth that we're seeing westward in the city is just phenomenal. So I've lived through a lot of phenomenal growth in this city that I call my hometown. In terms of planning, the planning department, you asked me how big it was earlier. I wasn't sure exactly, but I do know it's a lot bigger now. And they're doing a lot of things that, in fact, I mentioned to you earlier that I'm seeing a lot of things come back around. And one of the things that's come back around, when I was an intern, I mentioned we worked on a comprehensive plan in the 70s. Well, now the city has commissioned a general plan here in 2014. So I've seen a lot of things come full circle in this city, and that's very exciting. We have some planning tools that we didn't have back then. We always had deed restrictions, which is a very powerful tool. But now we have some additional planning tools that we did not have. We have this zero lot line thing that has been put in place to protect some of the older neighborhoods that don't want to really see townhome development. So we have some tools that we didn't have before.
So being in Houston, I've got to ask about the Z word. What do you think of zoning? Is it something that Houston needs, or is it turned to be a blessing that you don't have zoning?
I think I fall somewhere in between those two, I would say. As you know, zoning is, I wouldn't say it's falling into disrepute, but I would say that there is more of a movement toward looking at performance measures and how do things work in concert with each other. So in that regard, I wouldn't say that we've been on the cutting edge all these years because we've never had zoning. I wouldn't take it to that extreme, but I would say that the absence of zoning has not been the catastrophic thing that some planners would like to suggest that it is. But at the same time, I would like to see more tools that would, for example, at the Texas State Conference that just happened in Irving, I talked about the Third Ward Plan and lessons learned from that. And I said if I were queen of the universe, I would have more tools available to me than I had. I would be able to I would be able to tap into design standards, for example. I showed an example of a high-rise development that's gone up in proximity to one of our big regional parks, Herman Park, and it makes sense for that development to be overlooking a park a la Central Park. However, right around it, it's towering over single-family houses that have been there since before World War II. So those are some kinds of things that I would like to see us have more control over. There are some other uses that have occurred that I would not have been the one to say this is what needs to have come. For example, one of the things that the plan proposes is there was a lot of room for infill housing, and that's happened, but it has not happened in a way that I would like to have seen it happen. The design of a lot of the housing is really not picking up the architectural cues from the surrounding neighborhood. So to the extent that some kind of controls would have helped with that, then I would say yes, it would be really nice to have had some more controls and some more tools that could have been tapped into in the implementation of the plan.
Some of the people we've talked to have talked about some of the challenges of being a woman in the planning profession and a woman of color in the planning profession, particularly in the early part of their career. Did you find those same challenges?
I would say I was pretty lucky in that I came through at a time when women were starting to come into the profession. I had Mary Lou Henry, I had Sarah Jane White, I had Doris Davis Ebner, and a few others who I'm sure I'm leaving out, but they were ahead of me actually. And then I was in a position when I was in the planning department to actually hire people, and so I hired women, both women of color and women and Anglo females. So I came into the profession at a time when there was a trend for more women to be engaged in the profession. Now, there were probably more women than there were people of color at the time, but that trend was also happening at that time. When I came through the planning program at Cornell, there were quite a few of us. There was a recognition in the 70s that the complexion of the profession needed to change. And so I was part of that. I guess I was on the cutting edge of that.
I think the profession still needs a little bit more work on that.
Oh, we absolutely, and please don't get me wrong. In fact, I was talking to someone who was saying that we seem to be going in the opposite direction with regards to that. And this was someone who's involved with accrediting planning schools around the country. And he was saying, I'm seeing less diversity, which is why it's very exciting that we were able to get the planning school at Texas Southern accredited, because there will be a lot of female and minority planners coming out of that program, with which I remain very involved.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of mentors, Mary Lou and Sarah Jane. Are there any other people that have been mentors to you as you started in the profession or continuing on?
I just hope I'm not forgetting somebody, but they really were. I am forgetting. Roscoe Jones, my first boss. I've only had 2 jobs in my life, 15 years in the planning department and the one that I've created. But Roscoe Jones was the planning director when I came back to Houston, and he was just a fabulous role model. He was a very good manager, very smart guy, Harvard planning graduate, and he taught me a lot, and he gave me a lot of opportunities. So I have to give him credit.
Okay. And you mentioned Doris Davis too.
Doris Davis was just a real neat person. She and Sarah Jane were big buddies at the time, and the 3 of us would go to lunch from time to time. And right as we speak, there's a group of us, 4 women who are all planners who get together periodically to sort of shoot the breeze and gossip about what's going on in the profession. So I've always had the advantage of a group of people who I could turn to for advice and friendship in the profession.
Well, the flip side of mentors is, are there any proteges or people that you have mentored that you want to talk about?
Well, I mentioned Mike Davis. I'm very proud of the fact that of how he's progressed in the profession. And right now, there's a young man who is the section director. His name is Kelly Porter, who's a mentee, and we talk almost on a daily basis. There are a few people. There's gosh, I'm blanking on names right now, but there's a young lady who became the playing director of Missouri City, Juanita Green, who was a protege who I was very proud of. So there have been a few proteges along the line.
Okay. If you had any advice to give a young planner, what would it be?
Well, it would be to start out in the public sector, if you possibly can, because of all the wide range and variety of exposure that you get. And also, it's not a bad idea to start out in a small community where you get to do a whole lot of things. And the other thing I would say is learn GIS mapping and learn Spanish.
Okay. And do you plan to continue practicing for a while, or you got plans for retirement, or have you thought about that?
Well, I have an older sister who, when I'm kind of going through a bad patch, says to me, "And when are you planning to retire?" And then I come back to reality and I go, I'm not planning to ever retire. Why should I? Because here's the thing. If I retired, I would just continue to do this for free because I love it. So why not go ahead and continue to get paid for it?
Sounds like a great job.
I love planning. I just want to say that. I want to end on that note. This is a profession that I stumbled into, but it just worked out because all those things that I named, the history, the political science, the journalism, all of those are skills that I'm able to tap into and things that I use.
We've covered a lot of territory. Is there any area that you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
I can't think of anything that I would add. Just want to keep on saying how much fun I'm having. I'm still having a lot of fun doing this.
Well, I hope you continue that. I appreciate you spending time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.